What you are hearing is not the voice of a pilot in distress. This is something else entirely. In 1976, a young Mexican pilot named Rafael Perez was mid-flight when everything changed. His airplane was no longer under his control, and he lost consciousness. And then, he began to speak. But the words were not his own. This transmission, captured in real time, may be the only known audio of an extraterrestrial intelligence speaking through a human host. What happened in the skies over Mexico that day, and who, or what, was speaking through Rafael Perez? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Debriefed. My name is Chris Ramsey, and today we're going to be taking a pretty deep dive into a very mysterious case that was brought to light just a few days ago on social media. Now, mind you, this case has been around for a very long time, but recently on the podcast, Mr. Ballin and kind of caught fire on the internet and was spread around and sent to me.
There's this 23-year-old kid named Rafael Perez, and he's out of this airport in Chimalacán, Mexico. And I'm going to read to you the first thing that Rafael said to Carlos. The pilot is speaking, but not of his own free will. We are using him as a microphone.
I have since enlisted the help of a few researchers over at Area 52, and we have come up with a comprehensive dive into this incredible case involving a young pilot, age of 23, had barely 50 hours of flight time, and yet found himself 300 kilometers away from his destination while still maintaining an almost full tank of gas. But that's not the weird part. The weird part is that for an hour, while unconscious, he was communicating to the radio tower in multiple languages and saying that, in fact, the voice coming out of his body was not his own, but that of an extraterrestrial. Folks, this is one of the most fascinating cases I've come across, and there were actually multiple incidents involving pilots near Mexico during that time. In fact, 1 year prior, there happened to be another incident in which the pilot's aircraft was kind of commandeered by 3 flying saucers. But this obviously isn't the only case of pilots being intercepted by UFOs. And we're going to go deep into a few of these cases, including one that kind of, no pun intended, flew under the radar. During my interview with famed remote viewer Joe McMoneagle, he actually recounts a similar tale that never actually made it to the video that I did. And so this will be an exclusive snippet from my interview with Joe McMoneagle, which I didn't think was at all relevant. And I'm so glad that I did record it. Lots to cover. I got all the papers in front of me. And thank you guys for noticing my yellow cardigan. These will soon be available at area52.shop. Not sure who's going to wear this, but there you go. And speaking of paying the bills, here's a word from our sponsors. Out there, your data is being passed around like a bad secret. Name, address, search history. Even that thing you looked up at 3 a.m. Yeah, that thing. No, seriously, what's wrong with you? You didn't agree to it. You didn't say yes. They just took it, then sold it. And Incogni makes them delete it. Legally, efficiently, and without you having to spend 6 hours sending angry emails to some sketchy website. We use it here in the skiff because around here, privacy isn't paranoia, it's policy. Go to incogni.com/area52 and use code area52 to save 60% off your annual plan. You can't erase your data, but you can delete it from 187 shady spreadsheets. All right, folks, we paid the bills. Go ahead and leave a like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and if you're so inclined, leave us a review. This definitely propels us into a favorable algorithm with Spotify, and we enjoy that very much over here at Area 52. Also, quickly, Majestic 12, we've got female t-shirts. 20% of our audience here is female, and we do want to cater to some of you, obviously. So we went ahead and made some Majestic 12 shirts just for you. Enough is enough. Let's get into reading this stuff. Rafael Perez, the man in question, the man of the hour, the person that we were referencing who was channeled some type of alien being. His case happens June 21st, 1976. Well, on May 3rd, 1975, another gentleman, Carlos de los Santos, another pilot, by the age also of 23, I believe, had a really interesting encounter not only with multiple UFOs, but also subsequently twice with what are known as the Men in Black. And he describes them as identical looking, robotic in voice, and Nordic looking, very tall. This gets stranger and stranger, folks. But then we also have a case in Australia where another pilot known as Frederick Valentich, a 20-year-old Australian pilot, vanished under mysterious circumstances. And his final words were, "That strange aircraft is hovering on top of me again. It's hovering and it's not an aircraft."
It's hovering and it's not an aircraft.
So we're going to look at all these cases, but first, to set us up, suspend your disbelief, folks. Check it at the door, because we're going to get into some really wild and weird stuff. And we're going to start with my friend, Joe McMoneagle. Joe McMoneagle was known as remote viewer number 001. Arguably the best remote viewer that the CIA and the Army and the government has ever produced. Joe went on to remote view Mars a million years ago for the DoD. He did so many secret projects using his psychic ability for the military that it convinced me that remote viewing is something real. So a few years ago, actually this channel is about 2 years old now, and about 2 years ago I sat down with Joe in his house in Virginia and had the pleasure of interviewing him. Throughout this 3-4 hour plus interview, Joe regaled me with so many fantastic tales of his time as a remote viewer. We then began to talk about UFOs, where he recounted a time where he was in, I think, Bermuda or the Bahamas, and he saw a craft right above his head, him and his friend. His friend was then subsequently sent to the ER with radiation burns. He was given iodine pills, and he was told kind of never to speak of this again. Right after that, Joe tells me another story, one that failed to make it on to that documentary that I put out. Well, this one rings eerily similar to what we are looking at now. Have a look.
Now, I talked to a guy. In fact, I get invited to his house down in the Florida Keys later, and my wife and I went down there. My wife at the time was my second wife. We drove down and met him, and he flew back and forth from Fort Lauderdale to Bimini once a week. He'd fly to Bimini and fly back. So he did that for years, like 2.5 years. So his plane, he knew exactly, it was a twin engine. He knew exactly the amount of fuel he needed to go from there to there. He knew exactly how much time it took to go from there to there. And this one time he was coming back from Bimini, and he said he flew into a weird cloud. And it was weird because on the tips of his wings, it was starting to encroach on the tips of his wings, and his wings were disappearing. And it made him nervous. And then suddenly, right in front of him, this bright light opened up, and this huge object started right at his plane, and he put his plane into a nosedive, and it went over him, and he cut around to the left, and all he could see was this funny cloud again. So he dropped to the ground and flew the rest of the way to Fort Lauderdale. 10 minutes later, Fort Lauderdale got him on the radio and said, identify yourself, identify yourself. And so he identified himself, and that was no surprise to him, but when he landed, he was 2 hours early. Early. And he still had a full gas load. That's what he told me. He said, I said, well, what was this? He said, I have no idea what it was. But I don't fly out of Fort Lauderdale anymore. I fly out of Miami. I'm not sure I buy UFOs from another star. Mm-hmm. I think everything's local. and they may be interdimensional.
Very interesting. Now let's put a pin in that and travel to Mexico. So we have an interview coming up with Mr. Kretchy. Mr. Kretchy was the gentleman that was working at Acapulco at the radio tower who communicated with Mr. Perez, who was channeling this being while he was flying over a body of water. Mr. Kretchy sat down for a pretty lengthy interview in Spanish. My research team has since grabbed the transcript from that interview and translated it into English, and that's what we are going to be reading, which is his account. But before we do that, I want to talk to you about Carlos de los Santos, because this incident happened 1 year prior. So May 3rd, 1975 in Mexico, Carlos de los Santos, 23-year-old pilot for Mexicana Airlines, was flying a Piper PA-24 Comanche over Mexico on a clear midday route from Zihuatanejo to Mexico City. Pardon me if I'm butchering that name. Now, Carlos gives a pretty detailed and in-depth interview, which I've linked below, but around noon, Carlos was flying under 10,000 feet, all right? When all of a sudden, on the left side of his window, he sees a silver metallic craft hover right above his wingtip. This is then followed up by another one to his right. Now, when I say hover right above his wingtip, I mean this is 10 to 20 centimeters above his wingtip.
A dark gray object was flying over the left wing's upper surface for about 10 or 20 centimeters.
You're talking about 20 centimeters away? That's it?
Yep.
Now, for a pilot, this must be absolutely terrifying. But it didn't stop there, because a third object approached head-on, directly toward the cockpit windshield, but at the last moment dove beneath the craft and allegedly striking the landing gear. Now, the landing gear was actually damaged, and pictures were taken and confiscated. However, as you'll see later, he tried to land, and he couldn't get his landing gear to work, and that was confirmed by the radio tower. So all three objects were described as dark gray, seamless disc-shaped, with a black, glass-like dome on top. Carlos noted no visible engines, wings, or any normal means of propulsion. We're talking about 16 feet or 5 meters in diameter. All three exhibited identical characteristics. Classic disc or saucer shape with a smooth, seamless surface, no rivets, bolts, or visible joints. Dark gray, matte, or fossilized texture that lacked reflection or shine. This does remind me of the craft that Bob Lazar had worked on at S4. And each craft had a dome-like structure on top resembling a cockpit or canopy. The dome was black and glass-like, but opaque, and Carlos couldn't see inside. This reminds me of the craft at Aztec. You see in Aztec, New Mexico, when that crash happened. By the way, go check out UAP Gerb's deep dive into the Aztec crash in 1948. It's an amazing video, incredibly detail-filled, but as some of you know on the channel, I'm a big fan of Will Steinman's UFO crash at Aztec, and in here he also describes a dome on the flying saucer that is opaque and reflective, almost like plexiglass. So, immediately after the third object appeared, Carl lost all control of his aircraft. He couldn't turn left or right, and his landing gear was jammed. The plane began to climb without his input, eventually reaching 14,500 feet, which is well above the safety limits for an unpressurized cabin and without supplemental oxygen. So he radioed the Mexico City tower in a panic saying, "Mayday, I'm not flying my own craft." Here's an actual excerpt from Carlos in panic.
It's a very special experience for me. Yes.
Now, if that doesn't bring chills down your spine, I don't know what will. It seems so terrifying to me. But obviously, he goes into a great deal of detail in his 2012 interview And he's kind of thankful for the whole ordeal, but at the time must have been really scary. So the 3 UFOs escorted his plane, get this, for a full 18 minutes. And not only that, radar confirmed there was an echo of 3 crafts in formation alongside his. That was confirmed. So as Carlos neared the Valley of Mexico, the discs peeled away, one ascending toward Popocatépetl volcano. Very sorry about that. Another moving off horizontally, and the third disappearing from beneath his fuselage. At that moment, full control of his craft returned to Carlos. Now, he attempted to lower the landing gear, but no lights confirmed it was down. So over the next 11 passes and 77 minutes, Carlos was forced to circle until ground crews eventually confirmed that the gear was locked, and then he eventually landed safely. Being lucid the entire time, Carlos also talks in great lengths about the maneuvers of the craft, saying the flight behavior exhibited precision control at high speed, positioning themselves a mere 20 centimeters, less than 8 inches from his wings without turbulence. And then after disengaging, all 3 discs performed a 270-degree turn with a 3-mile radius, accelerating to 400 to 450 knots, which is well above 500 miles an hour, maneuvers that no 1975 aircraft could match. So Carlos emphasized the absence of traditional aircraft features, no wings, no engines, no control surfaces, and asked aloud during interviews, how do they fly? There are no wings, no exhaust, nothing. Some investigators, including Dr. J. Allen Hynek and Jacques Vallée, suggested that the craft created an electromagnetic field around his plane, potentially explaining his sudden loss of control and forced the altitude gain from 10,000 up to 14,500 feet. So, Carlos eventually lands the plane. He was immediately detained and given medical and psychological exams. Authorities suspected hypoxia, which is kind of this delirium that happens at high altitude, or drug use, none of which were present. He passed every test. His case made the front page news across Mexico, and 2 air traffic controllers publicly confirmed seeing the radar returns of 3 UFOs and described an impossible 270-degree turn executed within a 3-mile radius at 600 miles an hour beyond the capabilities of any known aircraft.
Cuando nos llamó más la atención y nos desconcertó fue cuando inició un viraje de 270 grados por la izquierda en un radio de 3 a 4 millas.
Carlos was later visited twice by the men in black. This happened twice in 1975. The first encounter was while Carlos was en route to an interview. So while driving to an interview with renowned Mexican journalist Pedro Ferriz, Carlos was intercepted. 2 identical black Grand Marquis sedans resembling diplomatic vehicles boxed in his car, one pulling alongside and the other cutting in front. The occupants, 4 men, emerging in unison and identical in appearance. They were described as followed: pale skin, blonde or light hair, Nordic, almost Scandinavian features, or as Carlos put it in his interview, they look like Vikings. Emotionless expressions, and their behavior felt robotic, stiff, and unnervingly synchronized. One man leaned into Carlos's window and said in Spanish, "If you appreciate your life, don't talk anymore." They returned to their cars and vanished without a trace, but it doesn't stop there. You see, Carlos was intercepted once again by a second encounter from the so-called Men in Black, only this time before meeting Dr. J. Allen Hynek, one of the lead investigators for Project Blue Book, renowned physicist and astronomer. So days later, just before a private breakfast with Dr. Hynek, Carlos parked outside the hotel. He ascended the steps, and he was struck in the back by a hand. Turning around, he saw one of the same 4 men from the earlier incident, identical face, same robotic demeanor. The man told him, "You are not going to see Dr. Hynek. Turn around, go." Carlos attempted to argue, but the man repeated, "Go. Get lost." and Carlos obeyed. He left without attending the meeting. Obviously, later, he would tell Hijack what happened, and UFO researchers Ray Stanford and Pedro Ferriz would help him reconstruct the events, confirming their interest in the Men in Black phenomenon and even linking it to NASA's classified research into paranormal activity. Now, we know this now to be the Men in Black. These guys show up everywhere, and the same description is given. They're almost uncanny valley-like. Like, there's something strange about their faces, the morphology of their heads, or just the way they look. And the fact that they spoke in this robotic tone just makes it so much creepier. In an interview, Carlos did emphasize the following. He said that the men were not normal humans. Their faces, height, and voices were identical. That's so scary. He said their speech was mechanical and almost computer-like, and that they bore a resemblance to Nordic beings but wore suits and traveled in diplomatic-style black vehicles. He later learned from Stanford and Hijack that other experiencers had reported similar cloned or duplicated Men in Black following major verifiable UFO events. This is so interesting that Carlos wasn't aware of the Men in Black, and he was describing exactly what other people have described. Fascinating. Now, if one of these Men in Black is out there and would like to sit down to the podcast, we'd be more than happy to accommodate your every need in order for us to have a conversation. Probably not likely going to happen, but you don't know if you don't ask. To conclude Carlos's story, he flew professionally for 32 more years, never reporting another encounter, and his voice recorded live during the event trembled as he told air traffic controllers, "I have no control. It's not me flying the aircraft." And folks, this remains one of the strongest cases on record, a broad daylight encounter with radar confirmation, physical evidence because of the collision with the landing gear on the plane, pilot testimony, and an attempted cover-up involving Nordic-looking type Men in Black. Just an absolutely fascinating case here of Carlos de los Santos in 1975. We're now going to go to Rafael Pacheco Perez, June 21st, 1976 in Mexico. I'm going to read to you, to start, an excerpt from UFOs and Mexican Aviation by Carlos Guzman and Alfonso Salazar. This book was printed in Spanish. I've had it translated here, this little portion, so that I can read and share it with you. The following case can be classified as the second most important to have occurred in the annals of Mexican ufology on the subject of UFOs and pilots. The first potentially being Carlos here that we just read. On the morning of June 21, 1976, Rafael Pacheco, a student at the Mexican Aviation School, was due to make a local flight to Chimalhuacan in Texcoco. I am so sorry about butchering these names, by the way. I've never gone to Mexico. I should culture myself a little bit more on how this is pronounced, but there we are. On whose ground runways all students from 7 aeronautical schools that exist in our capital carry out their internships. At 8:15 a.m. that day, Rafael boarded the Cessna 150 plane with registration XBZOX, took off at 8:25 a.m. and headed east for Chimalhuacan. The weather was cloudy and foggy. So, to set this up, folks, this guy was 23 and he was a student. He was learning how to fly a plane, and this plane was made for students. This plane was made for training purposes. It didn't have a big fuel tank. It wasn't made for long distances. This begins very anomalously. Such a flight requires 60 to 90 minutes of landing and takeoff. However, 2 hours passed without news from the ZOX. That's when the school's principal, Captain Miguel Batanero, ordered several small planes to leave to locate Rafael, as it was feared he had had an accident. At around 11:15 a.m., this is 3 hours later, while in full search, Captain Batanero received a long-distance call from Captain Ortiz Lara, the school's chief pilot, who was at Acapulco Airport instructing a student who warned him that the XBZOX plane did not have to be there, had been reported, and was about to land. This guy is now 300 kilometers away, hypnotized by extraterrestrials. Captain Ortiz also told his superior that something was wrong with Rafael. as he had delivered a 40-minute message to humanity and spoke of his being hypnotized by extraterrestrial beings. Very upset, Captain Batanero ordered that when he got off the plane, he had been given a medical examination in the presence of the aeronautical authorities of Acapulco. Rafael landed at 11:22 a.m. and was immediately taken to the airport command, where Dr. Ernesto Velez stated the following: "The undersigned extends to the present medical certificate Mr. Rafael Pacheco, who, after having examined, found himself clinically healthy." He had his wits about him, ladies and gentlemen. Immediately afterwards, an official information record was drawn up to attest to the event. Controller Villagran stated it was approximately 10:30 a.m. when the XB-ZOX license plate aircraft made contact with the Acapulco Tower at its own frequency of 118.5 megahertz, requesting that another frequency be designated to give a message. I told him to proceed in it, to which the ZOX insisted on the assignment of a different one, because the message was too long. He was assigned the 123.45. Subsequently, having made contact with the new frequency, the ZOX said that the pilot of the aircraft was under hypnotic effect and was being used as a means of passing the message. He said the person who speaks is from another planet. I come in peace. I do not want to harm the pilot or anyone else. He continued to broadcast a series of fantasies for about 45 minutes. This gets stranger and stranger, folks. But yeah, apparently he didn't want to be on, I guess, one of the frequencies that is used in short form, and he wanted to jump to a different frequency, one that I think could not be recorded, if I'm not mistaken. But let's move forward here. So here's the conversation. So the statement of Controller Kretchy, which we'll eventually get to, we have his whole interview here, which we're going to read through. Having listened to the conversation between Comrade Villagran and the famous strange beings, I agreed to take the communication with frequency 123.45, where the person continued to make a series of assertions against the human being. It made us see that we were an inferior civilization and that we were not alone in the universe, that there were many other civilizations physically similar to us, but mentally much more developed. He also said that we were close to a global catastrophe, and we are the only beings in the universe who have a self-destructive mind, and that, on the contrary, they were positive and creative. That they have the power to annihilate in an instant all our modern apparatuses and atomic weapons. He noted that they had the power to change the color of the aircraft so that it would not be seen by Earthlings, who at any given moment could be blue as the sky or white as clouds. Okay. So how come they speak Spanish? Well, this voice was asked a series of questions, such as, if they're so perfect, how come they speak Spanish? To this, the voice replied that they could understand any language in a matter of seconds. He was asked several questions in German and replied, having fully understood what I said in regular English. He explained that the message had to end so that the pilot could land without fuel problems. She was asked if we could ever see that spacecraft, replying that it would never be seen because we are so destructive and aggressive that we would surely attack it. Not wrong, but cool for asking. I would have asked the same thing, but yeah, not wrong. I would also assume that that's what we would do. And in fact, I would go so far as to say that that's what we've done. The voice was heard without any hesitation. Very easily in word, but slow. At no time did he agree to change the frequency, and a few moments later, the same voice was heard again saying, I am 82, who do I talk to, and where am I? The person was asked for her identification, and I noticed that she was completely confused. Okay, when it says the person, I think she is just he, but I think it's because of the Spanish translation. So yeah, the person said, who do I talk to, where am I? And then the person asked for his identification and noticed that he was completely confused. Captain Batanero referred to Rafael as a model student with good grades. He's very serious, and we don't know him as a liar. I don't mean this is true or false. I'm totally skeptical. But in the case of a boy like this, and also taking into account the conversation held in German and in English, everything makes me think. Rafael Pacheco Perez is a 23-year-old boy, and until the morning of June 21st, he had 53 hours of flight. So it can be considered that he only knew the basic rules of aeronautics. He was not under the influence of alcohol or drugs that day, as was later found. He does not speak German, and as for English, he only knows the technical vocabulary related to his studies. We could see this by having him answer a questionnaire in English about his experience, of which he understood only single words. So not only did he communicate some type of message, not only did he get to a place 300 kilometers away and still have almost a full tank of fuel. By the way, had he gone from Mexico City, which would have been, a routine solo flight to Chimalhuacan airstrip, that would have been 60 to 90 minute flight. But instead, he ended up in Acapulco, a flight which should have taken 3 hours. He ended up there in 90 minutes with a full tank of gas. Even if he would have flown super, super fast and miraculously saved on gas somehow, he would have had to fly through the mountain range like a professional pilot to avoid radar detection. This makes zero sense. This is insane. This is such an insane case here. Here's Rafael's story, by the way. And we're going to get into some of the things that were said, because the voice that came through Rafael also referred to Rafael as a microphone, which is super bizarre and dark and weird. There's just so much to unpack in a story like this. This is from Rafael. At 8:35 a.m., seeing that I had deviated from the route, I tried to turn left, but the controls did not respond. They had locked themselves in the ascent position. The clocks started to swing at the same time. The compass was spinning rapidly. All the instruments had gone mad. I entered a very dense cloud and continued to ascend. I had no visibility. Similar to Joe McMoneagle's report, where his friend going from Fort Lauderdale to Bimini also encountered a mist, sort of weird dark mist that he flew into. He was trying to locate the volcano. I called the Mexico Tower for 2 minutes on its 118.1 megahertz frequency, and they didn't answer me. I changed the frequency to 121.5 and even made calls from Mayday and PAN, which is like the emergency channel. But no one answered me. When I noticed the compass and instruments, I instinctively looked at the bow, on the sides of the plane and upstairs, and I saw nothing. So he was trying to find the cause, whether it's static electricity, magnetic field, anything he could attribute the damage to. Already outside the cloud, as I continued to call without result, I noticed that the altimeter was the only instrument that seemed to work well. The last reading was 10,000 feet. From then on, I don't remember anything. Only that I felt sleepy and was about to fall asleep. When I became aware again, I found myself on the open sea. I was at 7,000 feet altitude as the altimeter marked, and when I saw the sea, I was very surprised. I thought I was dreaming. I took the microphone and called out, "Student 82, to any station that listens to me." I immediately got a response from Torre Acapulco and was ordered to switch to the 121.5 megahertz frequency, which is emergency. I don't know how often I was broadcasting before. Then they asked me my position, and I replied that I did not know, but that I was flying over the sea. They asked me to locate land, and I found a very small strip. I informed it like this, and they told me to head there. Fuel from the left tank had run out, and the right tank was almost empty. I don't know how much fuel I had, and so I informed the Acapulco Tower. I was told to land on runway 24 and to use any available in case of emergency. I landed, headed to the platform, and saw a Cessna 310 from the school. It was the XVLON, where Captain Ortiz had heard the whole message along with Fernando Acosta, a student who was being instructed on twin engines. Captain Ortiz came to meet me, and I asked him, "Captain, what am I doing here?" And he said, "If you came on the plane and you don't know, accept me." Later, the controllers and Captain Ortiz himself began to tell me what I had said. I don't remember anything. If I hadn't been told about those beings who have brought me so much trouble, I would have thought I fell asleep and nothing else. So, this is really interesting because he now describes falling asleep while in a plane and then waking up hours later, in which case you should be dead. You should be in a mountainside somewhere. So to his surprise, he was over a great body of water, which was nowhere near the airstrip that he had originally planned to fly to. Incredibly confusing. So how could I get to Acapulco is what Rafael is asking himself. The aircraft that Rafael crewed was a Cessna Model 150 aircraft with room for 2 people. It does not have auxiliary systems such as the VOR or the ADF. It is intended for local practice flights. And in addition, the young pilot did not carry a navigation chart, flight plan, plotter, or computer that day. Rafael had only made one flight over the route with an instructor to Leon, Guanajuato. In short, the boy was not able to fly alone to Acapulco, even though he had carried with him the necessary material to orient himself. As Rafael headed southeast of DF and headed toward Lake Tequisquitengo, the radar did not detect his plane because it must have flown in the 12,000-foot chain of hills. Radar waves never touched XBZOX, and his position was not known until he made contact with Torre Acapulco. So there you go. He's flying under the radar over the mountain, between the mountain range. That's an insane thing to do for someone who has 50 hours of flying time. That's like if you just got your learner's permit, you know, you had maybe a drive with your dad teaching you how to drive, and then you all of a sudden you end up downtown Manhattan with people honking at you and trying to get through traffic. It makes no sense. Rafael lost consciousness at about 8:45 a.m. and contacted Torre Acapulco at 10:30 a.m. while flying over Mojoneras. That is, it was an hour and 45 minutes, which, adding to the 18 minutes of flight between Mojoneras and Acapulco, gives us 2 hours and 3 minutes, a record time, especially if we consider the deviation to Chimalhuacan. So not only did he fly on the mountain range under the radar with a Cessna with 50 hours of flight time, but he did this in a whopping world record time. To conclude, it says, at first, when we began to investigate the case, we believed that it was all a story invented by the pilot. But as we delved into the facts, we found no elements that indicated the student's joke or excuse. On June 24th evening, several people called the airport to report that they were seeing slow-moving UFOs. Mario Alcantara from Sol de Mexico tried to interview the director of RAMSA, the Radio Aeronautica Mexicana, Enrique Mendez, but he could not receive him because he was in an important meeting, and television, which initially broadcast the case widely, was later inexplicably silent. Now, this is such a baffling case, and so I would give anything to listen to that message. And in fact, we do have a small snippet of it. Listen to this chilling snippet of this being channeling Rafael.
El piloto de estado exótico a través de él mismo está transmitiendo este mensaje. Usted está haciendo la distancia a través del piloto, ¿correcto? Es correcto. Él únicamente está hablando porque así se les ordena. Es su voz, él está hablando, pero no lo hace por su voluntad. Lo estamos utilizando a él como si utilizáramos un micrófono.
Crazy. He took off from Mexico City, should have been a routine solo flight to the nearby Chimalhuacan airstrip. Instead, was him flying inexplicably 300 kilometers away to Acapulco, a flight which should have taken 3 hours in his Cessna 150, which was completed in just 1 hour. He then radios into the air traffic controller, Carlos de Kretchy, who we're going to hear from in a second, but his voice was strange, emotionless, and robotic, which is interesting because that's also what the Men in Black sounded like. The transmission says, "He speaks because he is ordered to. It is his voice, but he speaks not of his own free will. We use it as a microphone." And the entities claim to be extraterrestrial, physically similar to humans again, and confirmed the existence of other alien civilizations, and the voice spoke English, Spanish, and German, 2 languages which, especially German, Rafael did not speak. Not just fluently at all. He did not speak German. The interesting thing here as well is noted that, no drugs, no signs of mental illness, no hypoxia, but also that this would be Perez's last flight. He never flew again after that. It messed him up so bad, he claimed that the event and the beings behind it destroyed his career. He believed that aliens were malevolent and that he had been used against his will. Although they claimed that they were benevolent, Rafael didn't think so. This is an interview conducted in Spanish. I'll leave the link below if you want to check out the original interview. We have translated the transcript here, which I will be reading from, but please feel free to go check out the original. This is from Mr. de Kretchy. And pardon for some of the translation might not be 100% accurate, so be mindful of that. Here we go. "We are 2 on duty, and we hear, it was around 11 in the morning, or more or less, a very quiet shift. There was no traffic. Conditions were excellent. Blue sky, no clouds, nothing. Everything fine. It wasn't a distress call. Let me make that clear. I was working my normal shift in the Acapulco control tower. It was approximately 11 in the morning. Normally, there are 2 people on the tower shift. We were seated. It was a very quiet shift. There wasn't much traffic. Clear sky, no clouds, no traffic. And a call comes in on the tower frequency, which was 118.5. I remember it very well. And he says,
Acapulco Control Tower. We are aircraft XBZOX.
But they really said it using phonetic alphabet. That is XB Zulu Oscar X-ray.
One of those you call Cessna 150.
That caught my attention. He said, "You call them," as if the pilot is also involved in this. Why say "you call them"? And the way he spoke to me, the way he said it, caught my attention. So the entity is clearly the one communicating here, and he's like, "I'm in this type of airplane which you call a Cessna," which is such a weird thing to hear if you're at radio control. I say, "Yes, go ahead, give me your position." At the time, there was no radar in Acapulco yet. We did what's called manual control, which is calculation by speed, distance, and time. And almost immediately he says to me,
"The voice you are hearing is from extraterrestrial beings."
And this is the alien speaking.
"Look, I'm going to explain. The ZOX aircraft, the pilot is flying in a hypnotic state. We are using his vocal cords to speak to you. He is not aware. He is speaking. Rather, he is being used by us so that we can speak with you."
I was truly astonished when he told me all this. And I say, "Tell me the position of the aircraft." He says,
"It is flying south of your airport, over the sea."
South in Acapulco is straight out over the sea. And then he starts telling me a series of things. And I say, "What's your position?" He says,
"We are flying stationary."
Or rather,
"We are stationary, over your airport, at an altitude of about 85,000 feet.
That catches my attention because 85,000 feet is not an altitude that an aircraft could normally fly, not airliners, much less private planes. Obviously, also too much for a Cessna. A Cessna has a service ceiling of no more than 15,000 feet or so. The ones at that altitude wasn't the Cessna, it was those people, or the people that were speaking through Rafael. I go over to the window. I get up from my chair. I go to the window, and what we controllers always do is look around with our eyes for whoever is talking to us when they're near the airport. And I look up and he says,
No, no, no. Don't look for us because you can't see us.
This greatly caught my attention because the one who was speaking with me was seeing me. He saw my movements when I went up to the glass. And this really astonished me because someone can't see me if I'm in the control tower. It's a very high place. And he saw what I did. I sit down again and I'm astonished. So the interviewer then asks, we know from the chronicles of that time that there were some leaks to the press and that this supposed extraterrestrial being spoke to you in German because you speak that language. Is that true, Mr. de Kretchy? 100% sure. I speak German. My family, my parents spoke to me in German all my life, and I was at the German school. So my language, I grew up with the language until I was 15. And then he begins to speak to me. The voice of the one who was speaking to me was a completely metallic voice. Let's suppose like when a robot is speaking, something like that, in normal Spanish, but a kind of slow, metallic voice. The interviewer asks, without any accent from some country? No accent of any kind. He only spoke to me in normal Spanish, but as if it were a robot. We are speaking with you like that, in that manner. And then he starts telling me a number of very interesting things. He says, we are extraterrestrial beings. We are from another world. And I ask, from which world? He says, it could be any world because we move throughout the universe. And since that time, I was very interested in that kind of thing. It astonishes me. It doesn't scare me. But yes, it astonishes me because I realize I'm having an experience. And he says, we are beings from another world. So at this point, Mr. de Kretchy is kind of excited because I think he's realizing that he's having first contact. He's communicating with an entity from another world. And I say, well, how is it that you can speak to me in Spanish? He says,
what happens is that among many things we can do, we can speak the language of this world or any world.
And since my native language was always German, and thinking German isn't a common language, I said, well, let's see if you can really speak any language. And I speak to him in German. That is, I ask questions again in German, and he answers me in perfect English. Not in German, but in English. But I'd like to imagine he did it to show. I understand your German, and I also speak English. That's what he led me to understand. Rather, that's how I chose to understand it, and well, in Spanish too, of course. And I'm again very astonished. Oh, this is interesting. So he didn't actually speak German. Oh, he responded in English. Oh, that changes things a little bit. That does add a little bit of skepticism here, I would say. Conviction level lowered by a few points, but not too much. Interviewer asks, with the same metallic sound? The same. At this point, and he's beginning to tell me they were beings from another world and they could speak many languages and so on, another airplane calls me on frequency, flying over Acapulco Bay to the right of the airport, 4 or 5 miles out. And he calls me on a frequency and says, Acapulco Tower, the aircraft you're speaking to, the XBZOX, what is it doing in Acapulco? I am the director of Escuela Mexico in Mexico City, and that aircraft is ours, and we want to know what's going on. I say, sir, if you don't know, even less do I. He just checked in with me. I'm trying to give him instructions. They're speaking with me. I don't know. Give me instructions to land. My colleague brings him to land. This director is astonished. I don't recall the director's name. He comes to the control tower and says, let me tell you that XBZOX is a Cessna 150, a very small airplane. Its fuel quantity is extremely limited. Its range is very short, and it's not possible for this man. We think we know who he is because we're looking for him. We already had him listed as an emergency. Maybe he'd crashed. They're already searching for him in Mexico City. So may I use your phone? Of course. And he calls his school. So he says, the airplane is ours from the school. And can I use your phone? And he makes a call and says, suspend the SAR search, the aircraft has appeared. It's not crashed. It's mysteriously flying south of Acapulco. The interviewer says, this is very coincidental, isn't it? Very coincidental that the director of the corresponding school also turned up. The controller says, very coincidental. He didn't know that one of his airplanes was flying in the Acapulco area with an airplane that doesn't know how to do that, can't do that, doesn't have the fuel endurance to do it, and supposedly the one flying it didn't have the experience to do it either. So don't search anymore, it's appeared. By then, in a short time, the civil aviation inspector was already up with me in the tower, the airport commander, the owner of the school, and shortly after I had, 6 or 7 people there, utterly astonished. And they asked me things, and I said, wait a moment, let me speak with this gentleman because as controller, I have to give instructions. And I say, give me your position. And he says, tower, I don't know where I am, nor do I really know who I'm speaking to. And I say, you're speaking with the Acapulco control tower. So the interview says, at that moment, the extraterrestrial was no longer speaking, or did it continue? The controller says, well, yes, I skipped a bit. You're right. In truth, when the voice starts saying things to me, I keep asking why they were giving me that kind of information. Because they spoke about the world coming to an end, that there would be self-destruction among countries, and well, that there would be. What we now know there is right. And I asked why he was giving me that kind of information, and not to a president or, a defense secretary. Why to me? And I remember he said,
we cannot make communication with just anyone. With you, we can.
I didn't understand why. What was different about me for this message to be given to one person rather than another? That is very strange. That's a very strange answer. They go on telling me that they had the power of mimicry, that they could modify their molecular and atomic structure to be seen or not seen, that they could do many things. This message lasted approximately, what I can tell you, about 40 minutes. God, I would love to hear that message. And while I was being given this message, I'm talking about I already had the people I mentioned there, and they were listening to the conversation. And then the interviewer says, so the extraterrestrial or supposed extraterrestrial continued speaking in English? He said, no. When I asked him to speak German, he answered me in English. After that, everything was in Spanish again, all in Spanish. So they were telling me they would intervene to save humanity when the time came. In other words, they were setting themselves up as saviors in a difficult situation. They were telling me all these things. Above all, about being seen or not, about the world's languages, about being able to save the world in case of a conflagration. They were giving a message, let's say, to humanity. Now, this wouldn't be the first time we've had some type of being from another world warn humanity. This happens essentially during every single abduction encounter. This also happens during DMT trips. This also has happened with Dan Fry, I think in 1951 or 52 with the White Sands incident.
Dr. Daniel Fry, you have been on an extraterrestrial vehicle, on a spaceship which is supposed to have entered the Earth's atmosphere from outer space. How was it? What did actually happen? And when?
It took place on the evening of the 4th of July, way back in the year 1950. It occurred at the White Sands Proving Grounds near Las Cruces, New Mexico, where I was employed at that time, to set up instrumentations for testing of some large rocket motors. The event was simply the setting down to Earth of a sampling device which apparently was being used at that time to take samples of Earth's atmosphere at ground level.
Where he met this alien from another planet, maybe Venus or something, and gave him channeled, or telepathically gave him a message for humanity to put away the A and H bombs and, kind of drop the nukes and get back to your spiritual journey type deal. When I realized that, as I said, about 30-40 minutes had gone by. He says,
we are going to suspend the communication because we want this person to land at your airport safe and sound. We don't want to do him any harm.
Then I said, well, when are we going to speak again? Or in what time will we return?
We don't know when, very soon, or perhaps never, because time is not a factor for us. We do not take time into account. For us, time does not exist. Very soon, or perhaps never. And you will learn of our presence again.
Someday. Whoa. This interview, by the way, that we're reading through right now was 2012. So I wonder if he'd ever had some other confirmation since then. Who knows? Well, I was truly astonished, and then the communication is cut and reestablished almost immediately, now with the pilot's voice when he's supposedly no longer hypnotized. Without a frequency change? No, the same frequency. On the same frequency, they cause the pilot to return to consciousness, and he begins to speak. Now him, not me speaking with them through him. That is, his unconscious or hypnotized state is restored to normal. And he starts shouting at me. I'm 82, I'm 82. And I obviously don't understand. I say, what do you mean by that? I'm student 82 from Escuela, Mexico. I want to know who I'm speaking with and where I'm flying. But now he was speaking very distressed. Well, not yelling at me, but desperate. He says, I'm looking at my watch. It's about 11:30 a.m. I took off at 8:15 a.m. from Mexico City on a local flight, more or less towards Chimalhuacan, where the pyramids are. Oh, interesting. Pyramids. That was my practice area. 2 or 3 hours have gone by, and I'm seeing that I'm flying over the sea. I don't know where I am or how I got here. For now, I can tell you, you're speaking with the Acapulco control tower. I'm the controller on duty. Give me instructions to land. Well, give me your position. I'm not seeing you. I don't know where you are. There was no radar, he says. I can only see water. Everywhere I look, it's only water. What do I do? I didn't know what to do because he couldn't give me any reference. After a minute or two, he says, I think I see the coastline. And I say, then head towards the coastline, so we at least have a reference. Over water, I won't be able to determine anything. He starts talking. He says, I'm almost over land now. Now give me instructions. Okay, what do you see? It looks like I see the city with a bay on the left. And I say, then you're very close to the airport. The airport is in between what is Acapulco Bay, Acapulco itself, the airport, and behind the airport, it's a lagoon. I see the lagoon now. And he would say, I don't see, or I do see, until he says, I see your runway. And then I blocked the airport. Nobody goes out, nobody comes in to practically give him an emergency landing. Thank you very much. So during those 40 minutes, people didn't move, the medical person, the airport administrator, and they listened to the entire conversation. It was listened to in full by them. Whoa. The pilot finally lands fine. And of course, the moment he lands, all these people went down, went to the airplane and made determinations, took photos, drew up records that this kid, Rafael Perez, was not drunk or drugged. He was physically fine, if very nervous, but he wasn't under the influence of any substance of any kind, just very nervous. They took, I imagine, some immediate medical exam to check he was okay. He still manages to say to me, Tower, please, make a record of what happened because they're not going to believe me. And I say, don't worry, you involved me on a frequency for 40 minutes. This is automatically on record because I'm involved with you. You spoke with me and I with you. We have authorities here present and listening, and it's being recorded. Interviewer, and you had to sign the document? Controller. Yeah. Whoa! This is crazy, man. That exists. I mean, we heard a snippet of this distress call. I would love to hear the extent of it. If anyone out there knows anything about this case, please reach out. Mr. Kretchy says, let me mention something, Carlos. At the beginning, when he calls me on the tower frequency, he asks for a frequency change. That is not to be on the tower frequency itself because he didn't want to disturb traffic. I say, stay on that frequency, no problem. There's no traffic right now. Give me a frequency change. I want a frequency where there are no airplanes and where it's not recorded. So I give him another frequency that I could listen to, that I could manage. And it happened to be the frequency of the jet bridges for passengers. Those little buses that attach to the plane and disembark people, they use that frequency. So officially, this whole conversation was not recorded on an aeronautical frequency. That doesn't mean it wasn't recorded. They asked it not to be. I don't know the reason. Was that request when you started talking with the supposed extraterrestrial or at the end? A little after the start. So he asked me for the frequency change. Yes, of course. Oh, wait. Okay, so maybe there isn't a transcript here. Maybe the only part that was recorded was that little snippet that you heard earlier on, which was him saying, I'm using this man as a microphone. Okay. Unlucky. The authorities check him and so on. Another very important event comes that is truly astonishing. A mechanic from Aeromexico, you know full well, pilots, controllers, mechanics, dispatchers, we have an aeronautical license that gives us the authority to do what we do, and we can't play with that license. What we do and say is, so an Aeromexico mechanic comes over, or they call him, so that as an expert, as a mechanic, he can verify the airplane's fuel. Somehow, they verify the fuel and realize the plane had not consumed fuel because they check with the flight plan filed in Mexico how much he loaded and now how much he had burned. And he had not burned it. What? Wait, this goes against what they were saying earlier. I guess his gauges were off when he said, I looked at my gauges and he said the fuel tanks were empty. So that must have been Rafael reading the faulty gauges, because when they measured the fuel tanks, they were full. This plane flew about 3 hours with a pilot who didn't know navigation, with an airplane that, in theory, doesn't have the range to get to Acapulco, much less with the proper instruments. No radar, no transponder, nothing. And a completely inexperienced pilot. But most astonishing is that he did not burn gasoline. When the pilot is told, later I even asked someone to ask him something in English, he says, "Excuse me, but I don't speak a single word of English, I only speak Spanish." So who was it who understood me in German, spoke to me in English and in Spanish? It was his voice, but it wasn't him. The languages that they could see me when I looked for him, the fuel, and what he himself recounts when he gives his account and he says that he was flying after 10 or 15 minutes of flying in the Mexico City practice area, he intended to return to land. He tries to use his radio, has no communication. He tries to bank left or right. The plane doesn't respond, up, down, or to the sides. He starts to get scared, and as far as he remembers, the plane starts flying upward and backwards and upward. Imagine they took him, suctioned him somehow. That's where he remembers up to. He loses consciousness and regains it 3 hours later in Acapulco when he's speaking with me. Interviewer says, however, if he had done it as a student, given all the mountains there are, he might have had an accident. And the controller says, of course, because the pass between Mexico City and Acapulco must cross Chilpancingo. In Chilpancingo, there are very high hills. There, the minimum to cross on instruments, the airway, I think, calls for 13,000 to 14,000 feet. He seems never to have flown at that altitude. He was around 9,000 or 8,000 feet, so he was weaving through. But supposedly, he didn't fly. They took him. So he didn't have that problem, because the transfer of the airplane from Mexico City, well, Chimalhuacan, to the sea at Acapulco didn't happen by the airplane's own flight, but some other means that no one knows how. So what did the Acapulco authorities say? Look, they limited themselves to say nothing. In fact, when I was made to sign a statement, it's normal. At that time, we were Radio Aeronautica Mexicana, RAMSA, not SENEAM as now. That statement, which was signed before the aviation authority with the commander, the inspector, and so on, and I signed as a protagonist of this matter, as an integral part of it, was stamped confidential, where supposedly nobody knows, nobody knew. The company itself forbade me to speak to anyone about it. They said many people would seek me out, but please do not speak about it. They could even have fired me if I had. Okay, so he was warned and threatened about his job and made to sign a document, a non-disclosure agreement, that he couldn't bring this up. So what did the authorities themselves say? I don't know. They had no explanation, like anyone else. What was a fact was that the airplane could not have avoided burning fuel. And what they later hear, the recording they hear, was because a driver of one of those jet bridges accidentally recorded all this, and it seems they were able to hear it. We don't know who kept that tape. It mysteriously disappeared. I don't know if the tape was someone ran off with it. We don't know. But those 40 minutes, it seems too long for a time for the extraterrestrial or supposed extraterrestrial to have been speaking with that series of catastrophic messages. Wait, so there is a tape. Okay. We're flip-flopping back and forth between there is, there isn't, is there, who recorded it. It's out there, apparently. So the interviewer says the idea of those beings was not threatening. They didn't want to present as something bad, but on the contrary, as positive, as if they were good, as if they were going to help humanity, as if the bad ones were us. The controller says,
You, for example, the only thing we see is that you make weapons to kill each other. We see that. The inhabited beings. You are the worst beings, the worst inhabitants of the universe, because we see you kill each other.
That is, they rated us as the worst of what can be alive in the universe. So they presented themselves like, well, poor earthlings, right? But we will help you when the time comes. We're super good. The worst in the universe? I mean, that kind of aligns with the prison planet theory when you think about it. Like, this is where they put the worst of the worst prisoners from the entire universe. So does that lend a little credence to Matilda McElroy's statement? I don't know. But I don't like that. Of the whole universe? You know how many planets there are out there? Really? All of them? Every single one? There's not one, like, we're not top, bottom 5. We're the worst. So the interviewer asks, after so many years since you were a participant and a witness to that extraordinary experience, what do you really think you lived through? And he goes, look, at that time in my life, I was a controller. And I can tell you that afterward, there were other events where I could verify that very strange things were happening. I always believed this could be something, that someone was visiting. At that time in my life, in my mind, I thought we are not alone in the universe. That's what I thought. Because later as a controller in Acapulco and later in Toluca, we had a series of phenomena. Not the same as this, but seeing strange things on the radar, very strange things that I don't recall now because it would take us another half hour. But at that moment, it was very clear to me this was real. I believe that this happened. Now, who are they? Where do they come from? I can't tell you, because they didn't identify themselves as such either. What was a reality is that I risked my aeronautical license on a truth that I lived, that happened. There was simply an event outside the normal, completely paranormal. Because of the fuel issue, because of the languages, because they saw me, because of what the pilot himself recounts, inexperienced. The plane didn't have the capability to fly like that. So something very strange happened. Then a series of things happened to me years later as a controller, and I continue to consider that strange things exist in the cosmos, in the universe. It's my very personal point of view that things happen and keep happening. Because my colleagues who still work keep experiencing things. Things keep happening. I have a lot of contact with pilots. Many of them are really good friends of mine. They've seen impressive things. They have photographs of strange things. So my very particular point of view is that things happen in the universe. I can't tell you what, but I lived one of them, and it wasn't something normal. The interviewer then says, a moment ago you mentioned that the recording wasn't possible because of the frequency change that this being asked for. But what would you say if out there, I know someone who has this recording? Would you relive that part? And he says, I'd love to listen to it because, in fact, some pilot friends of mine, I think through my daughter, who is also in all of this, she's a pilot, sent me a fragment of that tape. The audio is very bad, but it gave me a bit of goosebumps because I managed to hear something that I know was how it happened because it was me, but with terrible sound and so on. So I really would like to hear it because it would be interesting to relive all of this because it was something incredible. Fascinating. I mean, I'm not going to repeat all the things that are so impossible that went on with this case, but I mean, it seems not only that we have two highly anomalous commandeering almost of vehicles and human beings happen within, the span of a year in the same sort of local geographical area. But that also there appears to be cover-up in both cases, and that this is nothing new, that pilots see things. We've had pilots call in here. We have a 1-800 number where you're free to tell us your stories. The amount of pilots that have called in is kind of staggering. And most of them don't want to go public because they might lose their license. They're afraid to be ridiculed or, lose their job. They'll be considered unstable somehow. And for a pilot, that's very serious. What do you guys think of this case? One thing I mentioned at the top of this investigation was Frederick Valentich. This is another sort of commandeering of a vehicle, potentially, but this one's a little more mysterious. I wanted to throw it out there just because it's tangentially related, as it is a pilot encountering something anomalous. But then the aircraft actually goes missing, and this happened in 1978, so 2 years after what happened to Rafael. This is October 21st in 1978. Frederick Valentich was a 20-year-old Australian pilot. He was on a solo flight over Bass Strait, and his final radio transmissions described an encounter with a UFO, and he was never seen again. Here is the shocking, terrifying, and very ominous final words of Frederick Valentich, followed by 17 seconds of unexplained metallic scraping sounds.
This is Delta Sierra Juliet. Is there any known traffic below 5,000 feet? No known traffic. Seems to be a large aircraft below 5,000 feet. What type of aircraft is it? I cannot confirm. It's four bright, seems to me like landing lights. The aircraft has just passed over me at least 1,000 feet above. Is there any Air Force aircraft in the vicinity? No known aircraft in the vicinity. Seems to be playing some sort of game. He's flying over me. Delta Sierra Juliet, it's not an aircraft, it's... Can you describe the aircraft? As it's flying past, it's a long shape. Cannot identify it, it has such speed. It's before me right now, Melbourne. How large would the object be? Seems like it's stationary. What it's doing right now is orbiting. The thing is just orbiting on top of me. It's also got a green light and a sort of metallic, like, it's shiny on the outside. It's just vanished. That strange aircraft's hovering on top of me again. It's hovering and it's not an aircraft.
So a massive search effort covered more than 1,000 square miles of sea and land. No trace of Valentich or his plane was found, but 5 years later, an engine cowl flap washed ashore on Flinders Island. It was confirmed to be from a Cessna 182 within Valentich's aircraft serial number range. Okay, so was that his plane? Can't say for sure, but seems that way. But then what's interesting is that numerous witnesses reported seeing a green light in the sky that night, and one person even saw a green light hovering above a small aircraft near the time Valentich disappeared, and an amateur photographer named Roy Manifold captured photos of an object exiting the ocean near Cape Otway on the same evening. The analysis was inconclusive. Now, I can't vouch for this photo. To me, this looks like it could be a fly, just like a horse fly, like you maybe see its like transparent wing in its body. I wouldn't say that this is a UFO for sure, but if it was, I mean, highly anomalous, for sure. Having such a weird, strange distress call prior to his disappearance makes it that much more mysterious. But it should be noted that he was a believer in UFOs and had expressed concern apparently about being attacked by them. So I don't know how true that is. If that's inserted by the Men in Black, I don't know. But there you go. So folks, that is today's comprehensive little deep dive into the stories of not only Rafael Pacheco Perez and his alien channeling experience and his mysterious teleportation, but also the story of Carlos de los Santos and his flight incident that happened when he was commandeered by 3 unidentified flying saucers and then subsequently threatened by Nordic-looking men in black. Also, Joe McMoneagle's tale of his nameless friend living in Fort Lauderdale, and then finally, Frederick Valentich's UFO disappearance incident in 1978. Thank you, folks, for watching. I do appreciate you. Head on over to area52.shop if you want to support this channel or check out our membership. You can join here on YouTube or head over to Patreon. It's $5 a month, and it grants you access to so many top secret things going on, including weekly video updates. Check it out. We'll see you on the next video. Peace and love.